I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this bright blue SUV next to me is the updated Hyundai Kona Electric. If you've already seen our Australian EV challenge, and I really encourage you to watch it, you'll know that the Hyundai Kona Electric is an award winner here on Chasing Cars. And that's because in pre-facelift form, it achieved bang on its claimed range by Hyundai. In fact, better. The pre-facelift car, Hyundai said, could do 449 k's of range. We found it could actually do 450.7 before conking out. Now, the facelift car can do even better. Hyundai have found an extra 35 k's of range, meaning the WLTP claim for this car is now 484 kilometers, mainly thanks to a change found down here. They've switched to Michelin Primacy 4 tyres, which are a little bit harder, they've got less rolling resistance, but they do give the car more range. But they probably also give it a firmer ride, and that's one thing we're going to be checking out in today's video covering the facelift 2021 Hyundai Kona Electric. Now this particular Kona Electric is the Elite. It's now $62,000, so it's certainly not cheap for a Hyundai, and in fact it's about the same price as a Tesla Model 3 Standard Range Plus. But the Hyundai does give you more range than that Tesla, both on paper and in the real world. But does it feel like a 60 grand car? Let's find out. Well, the simple answer to that question is no, if you're comparing the Kona Electric to other conventional combustion cars that are priced in the low 60 grand range. You know, it doesn't exactly feel like a Lexus or something in here. It feels like a pretty nice Hyundai. But the same thing goes for virtually any entry-level electric vehicle. A Nissan Leaf, for example, feels significantly more down market than a Hyundai Kona Electric. A Tesla Model 3 certainly has an impressive looking interior, but the materials used are actually not that great. So while it's certainly still a Hyundai Kona in here, it's built well, the material choices are generally okay. And if you understand the electric nature of this car and that's what you're buying it for, then I don't think the cabin is going to put you off per se. Now, while the outside of the facelift Kona Electric has had quite a switch up, it's actually a longer car as well than last year. The interior has mainly stayed the same apart from an upgrade to the technology. So we've now got twin 10-inch screens in this car. There used to be kind of a weird looking digital or semi-digital cluster in the pre-facelift. We've now just got the Hyundai Group's really nice new crisp 10-inch digital gauges, which look great. They also incorporate a battery meter, consumption, how much range you've got left, and also the regeneration setting, which can also be altered through the paddles, but it is automatic and senses the distance to the car in front. Over here, similarly, we have new software for the touchscreen. Some elements are actually harder to control, like changing the radio station, but other elements like the navigation, the Bluetooth audio, that has become slightly easier again, and the definition is excellent. There's also been a change from the previous Infinity stereo to a Harman Kardon system, and that works pretty well. Now the seats in the Elite, you can get them in a darker color or this very light dove gray, which actually presents nicely. The adjustment is manual, but the seats themselves are actually quite comfortable and supportive, and I found I was able to find a good driving position even without the electric adjustment you get on the Highlander. But the Highlander gives you heated and cooled seats, which is particularly nice, and it's worth noting that's not a feature you can get in the new Kia Niro Electric, which shares all of the bits and bobs underneath this Kona Electric, but within a more conservative looking and slightly larger body. In terms of practicality, it's pretty good. We've got mid-sized cup holders here in the center, a little bit of tray and sort of storage between the seats with some flock lining, another tray here with wireless smartphone charging, and okay sized door bins so they won't take the biggest of water bottles. And material quality, nice leather on the steering wheel, some soft padding here on the dash and up. Oh, this is hard actually. Unfortunately, the door skins are hard in this car. In the Niro, they're soft, but I think I can probably still forgive it, given how good the Kona Electric is to drive, and that's something we'll come to shortly. First of all, let's jump in the back seat. Now, speaking of that Kia Niro, it's definitely a bigger car than the Kona Electric, but there are trade-offs everywhere you look. I think that the design of the Kona is nicer than the Niro, for example, but you do get less legroom here in the back. For myself, it's 6 foot. Headroom is no issue, but my legs are up against my own driving position for the front seat, and toe room isn't great. That being said though, the Kona's seat base in the back is more inclined and more supportive than that in the Kia Niro. So it really depends on who, if anyone, you're planning to put in the back. If you've got really tall teenagers or you're planning on carrying 4 adults in the car all the time, then the Kia is probably a better bet. Also worth noting that the backseat of a Tesla Model 3 also isn't that comfortable because of how elevated your legs have to sit in that car. But anyway, you could get a 5th person in the back here at an absolute pinch because the floor is pretty low, but there are no rear air vents. There's one USB port back here, but we do get a flip down armrest with 2 cup holders. We get mat pockets on the back of both of the seats, and we get another door bin down here. So all in all, it's a perfectly serviceable backseat, but not generous in terms of space. The facelift Kona, both the electric and the petrol versions, are actually longer, to the tune of about 35mm, which has sort of beefed up the design a tiny bit, but it's also increased the cargo space very marginally. That being said though, the Kona Electric doesn't have a big boot. We've only been able to get a couple of our chasing cars suitcases in here, the biggie and the small. At least the load height is very comfortable. You don't have to reach to put your suitcases in. And if you can see there, there's actually a net to keep any groceries or whatever tied down. There is no spare wheel. Underneath that boot floor, there's just part of the assembly for the battery. So this is basically exactly what you get cargo-wise in the Kona Electric. Now, of course, the most expensive part of the Hyundai Kona Electric is buying it in the first place. 62 grand for the Elite isn't cheap, but you do start reaping the dividends once you actually have ownership of the car, because running it is very cheap. Electricity, of course, it depends where you get it from, but if you have the ability to charge the car in your garage overnight, then you are going to be traveling around very, very cheaply. If you pay about 25 cents per kilowatt hour of electricity at home, then you're going to be filling up the Kona Electric for under 20 bucks. And even if you use the ChargeFox ultra rapid charger network, for example, you're only going to be paying about $25, $26 to fill this thing up in order to go just under 500 kilometers. And that's considerably cheaper than what it would cost you to drive a petrol powered Kona the same distance. Now, the servicing intervals for the Kona Electric are still 12 months or 15,000 kilometers, even though there are far less moving parts to go wrong. They still like it to come in for a semi-regular or annual checkup. And the warranty on the car is 5 years with unlimited kilometers. That compares slightly unfavorably to the Kia Niro EV, which has 7 years of unlimited kilometer coverage. So what's the updated Hyundai Kona Electric like to drive? Well, this is actually one of my favorite EVs on offer at the moment. Now, in Australia, you've got to remember there aren't a huge amount of all electric cars. So that's the basis where I'm coming from. We can't get cars like the Polestar 2. We do, of course, have the Teslas. The Model 3 is the best-selling EV in the country, and there's a lot more electric cars on the way. But from what you can choose from right now in late May, early June 2021, the Hyundai Kona Electric is a really good little car. It starts with the fact that it's really efficient in the real world. That is kind of the Hyundai Kona Electric's biggest draw card when you compare it to other EVs. It just delivers on its claims. Now, in our recent EV challenge, we actually performed a full range test on a Kona Electric, pre-facelift version, mind you, driving it from 100% all the way down to 0 and completely dying and having to be towed out. And in that test, against the previous version's claim of 449 k's WLTP range, we managed 450.7. Now, for the facelift, there is obviously a few design changes, but the only real decisive element that Hyundai altered was a change in tyre to the Michelin primacy. Now, it's a harder tyre, it's meant to deliver more range. That means the claim is now 484 kilometers WLTP. Now, if you'd like us to repeat the full range test for the facelift version, you can let me know. What I can tell you though is that in my week of driving the car, I've easily managed 13.9 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, and that correlates to a range of 461 kilometers. Now, most of my driving is in town, and I haven't been driving for range. On our range test, we still had the AC on, we still had the stereo on, but we were using the cruise control, and we were generally being a little conservative. Now, I haven't driven that way at all. In my week in the car, I just drive to get where I'm going. And an effective range of 461 k's against a claim of 484 when you're not even trying, that's pretty good. So yeah, let me know if you want me to do the exhaustive thing again, and I'm happy to get the car back and do that. It's really no problem. Now the motor and battery are actually the same as before the facelift, 64 kilowatt hour battery. All of that 64 kilowatt hours is usable. So the actual battery size must be a bit bigger, but the usable size is 64, and that's all Hyundai talks about. The motor produces 150 kilowatts of power and 395 Newton meters of torque, which for a Kona is heaps. It's only going to be bettered just by the new Kona N, which comes out in Australia later this year. And I actually think it'll be interesting when the Kona N and the Kona Electric are sitting side by side, because obviously the Kona N is like a proper sports car and it's track tuned and stuff, and the Kona Electric definitely isn't. But in terms of outright performance around town, the two of them are actually going to be pretty much level pegged. But as it is now, the Kona Electric is the quickest Kona, definitely compared to the 1.6 turbo and the 2-litre Atmo versions in the range. And I mean, it should be, because it's more than $20,000 dearer than those cars. But I think it's, as I said in my first review of the Kona Electric, it's better not to think of this as a Hyundai Kona, but as an EV that can do 484 Ks. It's a long-range EV, it shares the body shell of a Kona, the interior is nicer than a combustion Kona, it's more refined than a combustion Kona, it's the platform where Hyundai decided to start. Now I do think the entrance of the Ioniq 5 will cause some problems for this car, depending on where Hyundai decide to price it in Australia. I can also imagine a scenario where the Kona Electric gets a bit cheaper in 6 months from now when the Ioniq 5 comes out, just to create a bit of a gap between those cars, but we'll see. I don't have a crystal ball, it's just a guess. Now, the ride and handling is much the same as before, but slightly improved, I think, by virtue of the tyres. Now, these Primacies are still not the world's grippiest tyre, and tyres that are sort of designed to extract range from an EV are rarely high grip, but they are a little bit better than the previous tyre. Just in terms of bite and turn in, and it's a slightly wet and greasy day today, and I think there's a little bit more traction with the updated Michelins, but it's a fairly marginal thing. I also think it's possible there's been a slight tightening of the suspension, slightly stiffer, but again, nothing major. I just think the body control feels like it's been reined in a little bit compared to the pre-facelift car. Now, the last pre-facelift car I drove was a pretty shagged press car with 15,000 Ks on the clock, and 15,000 Ks for a press car is a lot. Someone once told me that you have to add a 0 to the end of the odometer of a press car because they just get tested pretty heavily. So this car, which only has 2,000 Ks on the clock, is much fresher in press car terms, and that could be what I'm feeling. But either way, it's a nicely contained car. It's no sports car, but it doesn't mind, you having a bit of a punt. The funny thing though is just if you apply full throttle at virtually any speed below 80, the front wheels just spin for a second and then get going. Now I know there's someone else who's been running a Kona Electric for a while who swapped the tyres out for Pilot Sport 4s and got a great result. And if I owned the car, I think I would probably do that. I think I would accept a small dent in the range in order to get really excellent traction, because the motor just has so much torque that it's really hard to put all of that down if you just, apply full throttle willy-nilly. And we've got a single speed gearbox per se, so there's just no wait time at all, there's no lag. But unlike quite a lot of EVs which are urban sized, like the Kona, this car actually has good flexibility in the country. It will accelerate rapidly for country overtaking maneuvers. It has no problem at all. It feels like a V8, like it just lifts its skirt and gets going. It's fantastic. It has a better top end in that sense than cars like a Leaf or whatever, which is not actually that much cheaper than the Kona Electric. Now, naturally, it isn't quite as good to drive as a Tesla Model 3. A Model 3 Standard Range Plus with the rear wheel drive is, the classic balanced combination. It has, it's quicker again, significantly. It has better handling, better steering, and probably a fancier and better interior, I would say. It's a better car, but it doesn't deliver the same range for the same dollars as the Kona. It just doesn't. You can, of course, go for a Model 3 long range or a Model 3 Performance, which do have really good range, but then you're leaping ahead of the price of the Hyundai. So it really comes down to what your priorities are. Now, in terms of safety features, we've got really good lane keep assist in this car with lane tracing. We've got adaptive cruise control. We've got blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert, and a reversing camera that works fairly well. It's not the clearest I've ever seen, but it's certainly decent. And then if you step up to the Highlander, you get a whole swag of additional features as well. But even the base Elite is pretty well kitted out. So those are my opinions on the facelifted Hyundai Kona Electric. Personally, I'm a fan of this little Kona EV. No doubt it isn't cheap, but if you're looking for a long-range electric car that can genuinely do just under 500 kilometers very reliably with low energy consumption, this is your car. I like the way it drives significantly more than the Niro EV, which didn't benefit from the same Australian ride and handling tuning that the Kona got. You know, I even like the way it looks because, sure, it's not beautiful, but it is memorable, and the facelift looks pretty cool too. Anyway, keen to know your views down below. Is this an EV or a car you would consider buying? While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.